My name is Ros McMillan, and I'm delighted to be involved in recording an interview with a great Australian music educator. This interview is part of a project of the Victorian chapter of ASMEB, the Australian Society for Music Education, which is the peak body for music education in Australia. The Victorian project is titled Capturing Voices, in which conversations with eminent music educators are recorded and curated into an open collection on the ASMEVictorian website. Now, the word legend is bandied about a great deal in Australia, particularly in regard to sports people. We certainly don't hear it used much in relation to people in education, yet the word can justifiably be used to describe the subject of our interview, Mr. Graham Bartle, OAM. Graham has been involved in education and specifically music education for many decades. Over that time, he has witnessed great changes in music education, arguably more than anyone else in Australia. He has also travelled the world to document and thus extend our knowledge of music and music education institutions more than anyone else on the planet. Much of Graham's long and interesting life is presented in a biography to be published in 2024 and written by Elizabeth Mitchell. The book has the working title, The Ventures, Adventures, and perhaps Misadventures of an Itinerant Musician. We'll wait to see. However, Graham's life has been so full of events that we hope to capture some of those today that have not been recounted in his biography. Elizabeth is joining me in interviewing Graham, and the recording is being made by Michael Travers. All three of us are members of the Victorian chapter of ASMEB. We are delighted to be capturing the voice of Graham today, something which is important for both current and future generations of music educators. Elizabeth will begin the interview.
Thanks, Ros. Graham, you began your teacher training as a generalist teacher before moving into teaching music exclusively. What triggered the change?
Well, when I finished my schooling at Ballarat High School, the only thing I was able to do, apart from medicine, which I hated because I didn't do any science subjects, I took to teacher training. So I did a year of student teaching at the school, primary, then a year at Ballarat Teachers College. At the end of that 1 year course, I became a trained primary teacher. Then got a 3-year extension, a secondary studentship to the university where I did arts. And then after that I did dip ed. I did include music as one of my teaching subjects. It was called a secondary studentship at the University of Melbourne to do a university course and diploma of education. And I took the advantage of 3 years of arts and 1 year of diploma of education. I would have taken music as one of my subjects at the university, except I went to the first 2 lectures of a gentleman who was the lecturer in this subject, who was so philosophical about music that I didn't understand a word he was talking about. And so I decided to cut that out altogether. In the meantime, before that, I had become a fellowship of Trinity College London in organ playing. And that was what turned me towards music in the first place. Finishing all of this, I was sent to Yallourn High School to teach, and then became the teacher of music, history and French. 4 years at Yallourn, finding a wife and getting prepared to marry later on. 4 years at University High School, where the main influence was a lady who was the head of the music program in schools in Victoria. And I can't remember her name.
Doris Irwin?
Doris Irwin. Her name was Doris Irwin, and she knew that I was interested in music. She knew the principal of University High School, so she organised for me to have my spare periods at the same time as the lectures were going on over the road at the conservatorium. So I'd come and I'd teach my Year 9 history class and then rush over across the road, sit in a lecture by one of the lecturers in there, and then make my way back to teach French and so on. And sometimes this happened twice a day. It took me 6 years to eventually finish a B-Mus in that form. Slowly, just a little bit at a time.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you, Graham. That's terrific. Well, of all your achievements, arguably the most significant is your authorship of the International Directory of Music and Music Education Institutions. You visited an amazing 111 countries to compile this, some of which have been particularly memorable, quite often for reasons that have nothing to do with music. That's the visits, I mean. From hearing you speak in the past, there are many about which you have interesting stories, including the USSR, as it was in those days. Could you tell us something about your time there, please?
Yes, I've been 3 times to the what was then Soviet Union and since then Russia. The first time, it was after I visited China for 5.5 weeks. I had 12 months of study leave from the University of Melbourne and visited China for 5 weeks, being taken around by a young Chinese guide from one conservatorium to the other, about 8 of them altogether. And just incidentally, that young guide was splendid. He kept eyes on me all the time, except when we got to some of the cities where he knew the people who were at the hotel that I was staying at. And he used to go seat me at the table for dinner. He would go and sit with his friends. And here is me in a Chinese restaurant, not knowing anybody and not knowing any words of English.
Chinese.
Confronted with the menu. And I didn't know what to ask for, and I didn't have any help. So I just would smile at the person and just point to something. I don't know what I ate, goodness knows. Anyhow, that was the introduction to getting to the Soviet Union. This was 1985. It was Soviet Union time, finishing in China, taking the train up through North China, through what was then Manchuria, straight up into Russia, and having interesting times with the border police on the Russian side, because they insisted that I open everything in my bags, and also including any literature that I might have, because they were very conscious of the fact that nobody could take in obscene literature. So I did have a couple of what I suppose you would call nowadays fashion magazines, which, oh yes, they were interested in these. So we were seated in the train, waiting for the passports to be fixed up, and they started to look through this fashion magazine, and of course it had people dressed in the latest fashions, and there were ladies looking very beautiful, and So they were giggling at one another. Oh, look at this. And I didn't know what to say, so I said, well, would you like to keep these? And they did. They were most relieved. And then they gave me the pass, and I got through. So that was not a problem. Then I visited in a whole lot of countries nowadays that are independent. I think I started over in the far parts of Siberia, then to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine.
Armenia? Did you go to Armenia?
No, no. But up to St. Petersburg, oh no, it was Leningrad then. Then across to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and then finally at Moscow.
Golly.
Now, it was all by train, except for the first big ones going across the stands. Wonderful trip, but visiting all the big conservatories in each one of those countries. It was amazing what they do. The itinerary, the timetables and things at the music schools was identical everywhere because it was overseen by the Central Communist Party. Everyone had to do the same course, come what may. The big conservatories, of course, were the ones in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, the big Tchaikovsky Conservatory there. Each one of them was founded by one of the Rubinstein brothers. There was Anton Rubinstein and the other one, I can't remember his name.
I can't recall. I can't recall.
It also started with an A. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But they were brothers, and the St. Petersburg one, if I remember, was founded 2 years before the Moscow one. But you go into the Moscow Conservatorium, up the stairs, and there's this big plaque with all the people who'd been principals of that. Very famous names. It made you feel, you were a part of something pretty strong. So those were some of the countries that came out of this, and there were a few little incidents on the way. I remember being in Belaruse, in Minsk, the capital, and I'd been to the conservatory. It was a fine day, and walking home to the hotel, and there was nobody around much. Big buildings, 4 or 5 stories high along the roadway, and a very wide footpath. And I was suddenly conscious, I don't know what made me look up, but there, just couldn't believe it, a great pane of glass, huge pane of glass, came down, flopping. It must have been less than 2 meters away from where I stood. And I just stood, what do I do next? I was still there. I hadn't been hit by glass or anything. I looked up, not a sign what was up there. But I was wearing a jacket, and I felt in my pocket there were bits of glass and things that actually had gotten into my pocket.
Heavens.
Now that's a pretty scary thing to happen. Nobody was around.
So you just
what do you do? You can't speak the language. And there's scattered glass all over the footpath. So I just hurriedly walked to the hotel as quickly as I could, sat down and had a cup of something stronger.
I'm not surprised.
Yes.
Graham, your visit to Iran came about through a Melbourne connection. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, I was interested in Iran, because I'd heard that they accepted music, even though as a Middle Eastern country and following their religion, they didn't approve of it, but they accepted it. And so I thought I would write to, I don't know who it was, I wrote to the Ministry of Education or something and asked if it were possible to visit the place. I didn't get any reply directly from them, but I did get a letter from a young man here in Melbourne who was studying physics, PhD level, at RMIT. And he said his father was the principal of one of the conservatories in Tehran. And would I like to meet with him? So I said, well, wow, yes, certainly. So I met up with Ali Moafi, his name was, and we met in the city for coffee, and he brought a friend of his with him, and we chatted about what was the situation of music in Iran and whether there were music schools, but apart from what his father was doing. So it was all very positive. I got a lot of information about music in that place. Then I met him a couple of times, and I said, well, I'm interested in travelling there. He said, I could ask my father to invite you, which he did. And I visited at the invitation of this man. He was a great host. I arrived at the airport and he picked me up, took me at the airport into a big lounge room with 4 or 5 other people. It was the VIP lounge. And they gave me all sorts of food and drink and whatever.
This is the VIP lounge at the airport?
At the airport, yes. And then he drove me into the city. He said his driver was not working that day, but he would have to drive me himself. So he'd drive. I don't think he'd ever driven himself before because he was not quite sure which road to go on. And I couldn't read any signs, but we just drove along. And he thought he thought it was this road. So, all right. So he got off the main road, went around in a big semicircle, and it was a petrol station, of course. He didn't know. So we drove in and out of the petrol station, eventually got to the hotel. He was very nice. He invited me also for a meal at his place and then to visit the conservatory, a big 5-story building, about 400 or 500 students at it, tertiary level, and they were pretty well organised. And at the weekend, he and his wife and son, not the one that was in Melbourne here, they took me up to the hills, and we had a lovely time up there at a restaurant. And then I met up with a friend that I had sponsored for an ISME conference. Nazar, his name was, a young man, me in his 30s, and he, in Tehran, was running a private conservatorium for children. He took me there to his rooms in the conservatory that he had and showed me around. About 4 or 5 stories and about 40 rooms, each painted with a different colour on the door and bearing a composer's name. And the equipment was fantastic. They taught Western music, of course, and the playing of Russian instruments as well, the guzli and a few other things like that. It was a wonderful setup. Then we, with a couple of his colleagues, teachers, we went and had a Persian dinner, sitting in a Persian cafe, crouched down around the tables. Wow, that was great.
Fantastic. Graham, was it just a coincidence that you got a letter from an Iranian in Melbourne? Did it have anything to do with the original letter that you wrote? Do you think?
No, I think I might have. Goodness knows what happened when my first letter went to Iran. I think it probably went to somebody who knew this man.
Oh, right. Yes.
I don't really know what the situation was, but it was very beneficial.
Sounds like it. Graham, there are other countries with interesting stories. I've heard you talking a little about Myanmar and Niger. Do you want to talk about either of those places?
Myanmar, yes. I had written, or I had edited a hard copy of the directory that had been started in the late 90s, and I visited in Myanmar before it had become an online version, and I met up with, of course, they are very strict on who they let in. I met up with one of the government ministers of the arts, and he took me to a meeting with the government representatives, all members of the military, of course, and I had to confer with them. I had a translator with me who came from that country, and we discussed various things and why I was there and what I was looking for. And I did mention that I had this directory and I wanted to include them in it. And so we came to an agreement that they'd be very happy for me to see what was there and to visit music schools. And the provision was that I had to send them a copy of the directory, even before I published anything about them in it. They wanted this copy. All right, yes, we'll do that. So I went to the what do they call them? There's a University of Music and there's a pre-University of Music. And we started off with the pre-school, many classes, all in perfect uniforms, and all of them learning to play in ensemble, seated across the room, across the floor, all with their instruments, all doing exactly the same thing at the same time. It was lovely sound. Then you go from there, my voice is giving out.
So were they playing in unison, or were they playing pieces?
They were all playing the same thing.
Right.
In unison. Yes.
So what would be like a variety, like a concert band variety?
That's right.
So you'd have a B flat and an F instrument, but they
that sort of
presumably
thing.
they transposed them.
Then you went on to the university level, and they were much more extended, of course. They were doing greater things, but the things that intrigued me were the drum circles. Circle about the size of this table, with about a dozen drums in the middle. The player sat in the centre and was able to move around and play the drums. It was wonderful.
Like on a Lazy Susan.
Yes, yes. It was a great experience to see that. That was in the capital, which was
Rangoon, isn't
It
it?
was Rangoon.
Myanmar's capital, yes.
It was. I know it very well. Rangoon.
Perhaps we could stop.
Yes.
We could look it up,
Yeah.
and then we could retake.
Yes, okay.
No,
yes.
but it's changed now. It's not there, because one of their wizards spoke to the head of the country and said, "This is not a good place to have the capital. You're going to move it up into the jungle."
Oh, right.
So they've now moved the capital up to a jungle.
Okay, well, Libby's about to find out where it is.
Rangoon, Yangon.
Yangon.
Yangon, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yangon.
All right.
Yangon.
You were quicker than Google.
Yes, that's right. Well, anyhow, that's where that was. A lovely lady who was the vice director of that conservatory. We were thinking about inviting her as a sponsored person to the ASMEVictoria conference, but she said yes, she'd love to come. And just before we issued the main invitation, she said she's sorry, they wouldn't let me come.
Oh, what a
She
shame.
couldn't go. So that was a shame. Oh, I went up to Mandalay also.
That's where I went, yeah.
There's the road to Mandalay, and it was not really a very productive visit to Mandalay. I visited the music school there, and they only had a sort of a string quartet. They were playing Western music there. And then I thought I would get the taxi man to drive me to the university, which was a little way out, the music part of the university. And he eventually found it. It took a long time. And there was nobody there. There were about one staff member and a few students. I had an interesting little conversation with them, but I didn't get anything of great value from that, except that their music course, again, was much the same, or supposed to be much the same as in Yangon. So that was Myanmar. Niger in Africa. This was at the a response to an invitation that came out of the blue from UNESCO, the music section of UNESCO. Would I be able to join a panel to can't quite remember what we were supposed to be going to do, but they wanted somebody from outside to put in some words and thoughts about what was happening. And that seems very vague, but I took up the invitation anyhow because I didn't know what I was in for. It was an interesting trip to get there, of course, because I thought you don't go away on a visit like this and just visit one country. You've got to make the most of adjoining countries. Well, there are not many adjoining countries that I knew much about in Africa. So I went to Cyprus. That was lovely. And then Athens. And then Athens, supposed to go, we're going to Malta. But something happened to the plane. And I missed that plane. So I had to take another plane from Athens up to Rome and then down to Malta. It's like two sides of a triangle. Malta, then to Niger. And it was a wonderful experience getting to there. They put us up in a good hotel and we had our meetings. There was a French-controlled conservatory there because Niger in that time was managed by the French. And they had a Frenchman who organised a music school there. A splendid affair it was. They took in ragamuffin children, boys and girls, roaming the streets who didn't go to school. They gave them lessons for free, and when they were reasonably well trained, they got them together and make little groups and organised places for them to go and get paid work.
Wow.
It's a lovely, lovely thought. I don't think it happens anymore. So that was what we were mainly concerned with. One very interesting experience was the UNESCO does all sorts of things very well, and they organised a particular transitional function, a marriage function, for us to see what went on. And they got a tribe, I suppose you'd call them a tribe, they're Bedouins, from about a number of about 12 young men. And they performed a wedding, no, it wasn't a wedding, an engagement ceremony. And what just had to happen, they were all in their main dresses. The men had to dress up as ladies and wear lipstick and beautiful gowns and everything. And the ladies had to come along and talk to each one and choose one that they thought was going to be the right person for them. An interesting way to set up a conjugal group. That was very colourful, and then they danced and so on.
Did any of the women decide that there was no bloke there that's good enough?
I don't quite know. They all looked very handsome, I must say.
In their lipstick and dresses.
Yes, and also all the costuming.
Yes, of course.
It was wonderful.
Yes. The other area, Graham, where you have made a great contribution has been here in Australia to the AMEB, or the Australian Music Examinations Board. Now, my co-interviewer, Elizabeth, is an active member of the AMEB as a federal examiner, and so she is going to ask you and talk to you about AMEB and your role in it.
Graham, the AMEB has played a huge part in your working life. Could you tell us about some of your travels overseas for AMEB?
Yes. There was a time when AMEB was restricted to Victoria, and then one of the directors of the Victorian branch of the AMEB decided that it would be a good idea to extend. And so several of us were asked if we'd be willing to travel to overseas nearby countries to do some examining. I could see straight away some of the problems because of language, but thought, all right, well, this is worth a trip. They were going to pay for us and put us up at the best hotels. And so I said yes, and there were various other people that I could name that who also said yes, but I'm not going to name them. And we were sent to Thailand. Fascinating place, because not only was it going to be in the main city, but we were sent up north to right where Thailand meets China to do exams up there. Flown up for the occasion. Then at the other time, East Malaysia itself, but East Malaysia is over in Borneo, on the island Borneo. And that, again, was a very interesting experience because of language. Laos, I don't think we did very well in Laos somehow, because there were not a number of people who really understood what we were there for. But it was on just the same. New Zealand, we extended to New Zealand at that stage too.
I think Cambodia was another country you've
Yes.
mentioned.
Graham, your work through AMEB was of course greatly valued, and you were awarded the fellowship, the F.Mus.A. Now, along with the metropolitan examining, you did a great deal of examining in regional Victoria. I'm sure there are some stories associated with those country trips.
Well, yes, there are always stories associated when you go to the country. Mostly they're comfortable stories, and the people are very, very splendid. You go into private homes and they feed you, sometimes feed you excessively. I remember Ballarat at one stage having to go to a convent to examine on 3 separate days, one after the other. Now, if you go to a convent, the people there, the nuns, are very attentive. I can remember one day, the first morning, they brought in morning tea, ribbon sandwiches and plates of cake. Then at lunchtime I was ushered into the main dining hall. There was a roast lamb, a whole roast lamb there, and a bottle of sherry, and vegetables. It was a whole roast dinner, followed by dessert. Then afternoon tea. I came in with some petit four on a little tray, and that was all very nice. By this time, of course, you're feeling a little bit woozy, and at the end of the day, I used to have to go for 5-kilometre walks to walk it all off. But the problem was the next day was the same. But instead of a roast lamb, it was a roast beef. And the third day, a roasted pork. And I could hardly move myself by the end of the third day. It's a bit of a problem.
You put on several kilos.
I did.
Graham, I have to ask, did the level of the sherry bottle remain the same?
It went up and down because I think I drank perhaps a few drops of it each time, but then it came back higher the next day. I don't know whether the inmates of the place had little drink and then filled it up again, what happened. But so that was Ballarat. But there was one place in Gippsland I remember very well. Perhaps I shouldn't mention the name of the town. Yes, I will. It was Corumburra. And I was due to be there at a certain time, I think it was 10:30 or something in the morning. And I arrived at the door and the lady came out and she said, "Oh, well, yes, you can come in. We're shifting house and all the furniture has gone, but we've kept the piano and we've kept a chair for the piano and a chair for you." And the place was empty other than that. And all the packing cases were all in the kitchen. So I said, "All right, well now I need a table to write on. I can't write on my knee." Oh, that was a problem. So they went and got a packing case and put it up in front of me. And I had to write my reports on the packing case. No, there was nobody there to welcome students into the house, and it was very cold. And so what they had to do, the lady said, "I'm sorry, I have to go out. I'm going to leave you to do your examining." So here was me in this derelict house, and the lady had gone out, and the students were going to come. I thought, well, they can't come into the house. What are they going to do if they're sitting in here? You don't sit in with the exam. So I think she must have arranged, said, "You stay outside till the examiner calls you in." Well, this is what happened. So the students had to sit outside in their cars or in whatever shelter they could find and come in one at a time and be examined. And it was a pretty horrible situation.
So you had to go out to the car and say,
"No, I
next
just
one?"
go to the door and beckon." And so that was, I think they were the shortest exams that I ever had with the AMEB.
Graham, what did you do for morning, afternoon tea and
No,
lunch?
there was none.
No.
Nothing at all. I got out as fast as I could before the lady got home, actually. So I just left the house and it was empty.
There you go. Graham, you've got interesting views on the way examining systems worldwide approach theory. You think that there's something questionable about one aspect in particular?
Yes. Theory has always troubled me because of its name. I think it gives the idea that it's dry and dusty. Well, so it is. If you don't realise what the problems are for the children. I have a student right now who he's got a little textbook and it's very nice. It's got puzzles and things in it and he's learning. He's only in grade 7
At school?
No, sorry. He's just finished being 7 years old.
Oh.
He's 8. And his mother comes with him.
So grade 3, probably.
He looks through this textbook, and there are all sorts of lovely things for him to do, to fill in simple little things, rudiments that perhaps the teacher should be teaching as they teach the instrument, but I'm quite happy to do that. Then I turn over one of the pages and I see 4-part harmony. I said, what's this kid going to do? How does this affect somebody, a young person, who's got suddenly to grapple with 4-part? I'm not going to do that. We're not going to follow that path at all. Even with older people, end of primary, early secondary, all syllabuses, everywhere for all examining boards that I know of, start off with the harmony side of things as soon as they can. And it's too soon. It's too complicated. It's abstract. And so my thought is, why do they have to consider consecutive fifths and distances between soprano and alto and tenor? Why do they have to consider all these things? What are they writing for when they're writing 4-part harmony? They're writing for people to sing. Now, little children are not really interested in writing people to sing in 4 voices as a choir. So, what's the answer? Do you not teach them that? No. My thought is, start with something simple. Well, they learn to write little melodies of their own. Why not start with simple counterpoint? 2 parts. So they learn how 2 parts flow together, using thirds together, sixths, fifths where necessary, octaves. And so write 2 melodies that flow with those sort of easy intervals. Because after all, in 4-part harmony, the 2 parts you hear clearly are the top and the bottom, soprano and bass. Now, if those 2 gel together, it's relatively simple, although not always easy, to fill in the gaps when they've got a more mature feeling for what they're trying to do. So what I have done in the past, you have to prepare students for exams if that's what they're aiming for. You have to give them harmony and so on. And counterpoint doesn't come in until a higher level. So if we start with the lower level, start with counterpoint, species counterpoint works wonderfully. Note against note for a start. The second one, they get a melody. Let's write another one of half-length notes that goes with it. And then they feel they're producing something that sounds like music, rather than you've got to make this note go, no, that mustn't go there, it mustn't be doubled and so on, which is a headache. I think more children are turned off music by having to learn harmony too soon before they're capable of really doing it well than the world ever knows. They've they're turned away.
Yes, for sure.
Graham, when you're teaching counterpoint, do you start with working at the piano?
I don't know whether I think you have to. Well, in a lesson, for instance, I would say this, and I'd go and play it, and I don't think, no, let me stop there for a minute. I would think, first of all, I would write something that the two parts will go well together. Then you go to the piano, see what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the way that I would tackle it. And when they go to do something at home on this, they go and play it. Don't just sort of bring it to me as something that I've got to mark. Go and play it and see if it sounds good, and if it doesn't, change it.
Yes, makes sense, yes. Graham, if you could travel back in time, would you do anything differently, you think, looking over your very long and interesting life?
The answer is no.
Excellent. Look, I think that we can say thank you so much. It's been tremendous today, unless Livy or Michael have got anything more they'd ask. We've learnt so much about you, and it's going to be a wonderful addition to the project, Capturing Voices. We've certainly captured your voice today, with one of Australia's most eminent music educators. So thank you very much indeed for your time today. We're terribly grateful.
Right. Thank you. I wish I had a more fluent exponent of my thoughts.
You've been very fluent. We've heard some treasure today. So thank you so much. Thank you, Graham.
Yes. Well, yes, there are so many things that just keep cropping up and I've forgotten about, but then there are triggers and off they go.
Thank you, yes. Okay. Oh, that's been terrific. Thanks, Graham.